Hey everyone, welcome back to John's Watch. Today I'm going to be taking a look at two games in this video. The two games I'm looking at are Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition and Class of Heroes 2G Remaster Edition, both of which I'm looking at on the PC on Steam. These games are both developed by Acquire Corp and published by P-Cube, and are both going to be released on April 26, 2024. They have individual Steam pages, but at least on other platforms, there's meant to be a collection bundle of the two. There's nothing like that up on Steam at the time of recording, which is still a ways away from release. But potentially that bundle is going to come at some point. So I've spent a bit of time with these games, and I'm going to split the video not in half, but into two sections. The first section for covering the first game, and the second section for covering the second game. I've spent considerably more time with the first game than the second game, so this video will be mostly focusing on the first Class of Heroes, but I will definitely talk about the second one towards the end of the video. So the first Class of Heroes was a PSP game that was released in Japan in 2008 and in North America in 2009. It was developed by Zero Div and published, in Japan at least, by Acquire, and published by Atlas in North America. So as I mentioned, these remasters are technically, they're developed by Acquire, which was the Japanese publisher of the original. It's a party-based first-person dungeon crawler. Basically, you play as an entire class of students, hence the name Class of Heroes. You don't just play one student or play the main student or anything, or play your own student even. You play as an entire class of students. You enroll in this school called Particus Academy, which is basically the training grounds for new adventurers, new heroes, people who want to delve through dungeons and level up and become heroes, basically. When you start up the game, it absolutely flies through the intro. You're basically told, "Welcome to the Academy. Quick, it's opening speech time. Let's go to the opening speech." About 12 seconds later, the opening speech is done. You're shown a menu of the layout of the school, and then you're on your own. It's up to you to figure out the rest. And you get tutorial pop-ups each time you go into a new building in the school. But there are a lot of buildings, and some of the tutorial pop-ups have multiple pages. So it's a very overwhelming first impression, I found. Once you do finally understand the layout of the school and what each building in the school means, and what all of the sub-menus in these buildings do actually mean, you eventually put together your kind of active roster. Your roster's divided into two groups of three. You've got the front line and the back line. Basically, you choose 3 of your students to go into the front line, and 3 to go into the back line. The ones you want in the front line are fighters, monks, anyone who does melee combat. The ones you want in the back line are mages, archers, that kind of thing. So at the beginning, I thought that 6 party slots seemed quite overwhelming. I've been playing a ton of Final Fantasy, the old Final Fantasies, the Pixel remasters, and those are obviously just 4 party members. So that's very much what I'm used to, and I think that's very standard for JRPGs. So at first I thought that 6 slots might be a little bit overwhelming, but I soon realized that you do need most of these party slots. You need at least 1 or 2 big strong hitters to actually do damage when you're in the dungeon. You ideally want a priest class so you can constantly heal up your party. You also pretty much ideally need a thief class as well, because they can, in the dungeon you'll find chests a lot of the times, and the thief can check the chest to see if it's trapped, and if it is trapped they can disarm it. Without the thief, you're just kind of rolling the dice on every chest you find, and you might get poison damage or some other kind of affliction. Once you've put your party together, you can start heading out into the dungeons. Right at the start of the game, you've got 2 dungeons unlocked. You've got, I think it's called Novice Path or something, obviously the introductory dungeon. You've also got, I think the other one's called Haldea Path, which is slightly above the introductory dungeon. So I think I spent all my time in Novice Path, or whatever it's called, just the starter dungeon. And that's where you come into the first-person dungeon crawling. First-person dungeon crawling is definitely not for everyone. I used to absolutely despise it. It used to be probably my least favorite genre of like any RPG, pretty much. If something was first-person dungeon crawling, not interested. I've somewhat come around on it in recent years, mostly thanks to Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. The first Persona game was first-person dungeon crawling. Shin Megami Tensei If was first-person dungeon crawling. These are all both quite old games. So it's not an instant turn-off for me anymore, but still, if I have the choice, it's still probably my least favorite kind of RPG and kind of dungeon experience. So you wander around in the dungeons, there are random encounters, there are also some encounters on the map where you'll see a floating crossed pair of daggers, swords, and that obviously indicates that there is always going to be a battle there, but otherwise you're just getting random encounters. The combat is pretty much what you'd expect. You can get anywhere between 1 and probably like 12 to 15 enemies at a time in combat, which seems like a lot, and it is. Like, you're controlling 6 people, you're sometimes facing like twice as many enemies as you have in your party. It's a lot, and you pick your move for every character. Most of the time your frontline people are going to be just attacking, your backline people are going to be either defending or using their magic. The magic MP system works quite similarly to the very first Final Fantasy and the third Final Fantasy. This is just my point of reference now because that's all I've been playing recently, where you get a specific number of casts per magic level. It's not like you have a general MP bar. You have, let's say, like 3 casts of level 1 magic, 2 casts of level 2 magic, that kind of thing. So you definitely don't want to be using your magic every single round in combat, so I found a lot of the time I was just attacking with my melee guys and defending with the back row and just healing if I needed to. So that's kind of the game. I played this first game for just barely under 2 hours. I think Steam says 110 minutes. My actual save file has less than that because I started the game, struggled around blindly, didn't know what I was doing, went into a dungeon, had everyone wipe, went back to town to res them all, and it cost literally all of my money to res everyone. And then, I didn't have any money left for anything else, even to like rest and recover HP for the people who hadn't died. So I think I went back into a dungeon, died again, and then just restarted because I felt I had a bit more of a grasp of the game. There's also a quest system. There's, in the library in the school, there's a bulletin board which has various quests. And this is sort of meant to introduce you to some of the basics of the game. It's not explained well at all. I completely missed that there were these quests in my first attempt at playing the game. And it was only when I searched up a walkthrough, and I found one spoiler-free walkthrough for the PSP version, did I realize that you have to go to the library and click on bulletin board, and then you get to accept the quests. And so that definitely helped a bit. My second attempt at playing the game went a bit better, but I quickly realized that even though it was going better, I was not having any fun whatsoever. And here we come to the crux of this video, in that I do not like either of these games. They're so boring, so slow-paced. The combat, let's go back to the combat for a moment. Like I said, you're choosing 6 characters' moves, and I found myself just every combat encounter was literally just, I would queue up the right moves for that combat encounter, and then just have to mash A constantly for like 2 minutes. Because, like I said, you're controlling 6 characters, sometimes you're against like 12 enemies. That's a ton of text boxes you're having to click through. And I just found I was just mashing A, and it was just a miserable experience, especially going from, I played Final Fantasy III Pixel Remaster right before this. That's got an auto battle system, which is awesome, which is where you set up what moves you want your characters to do. Auto battle, they'll do it. It'll skip through the dialogue for you. Wonderful. This, I was just so frustrated, just constantly mashing A. I didn't find the combat interesting exciting, fun at all. This is a remaster of a PSP game. Obviously, PSPs did not have great screens, very high resolution screens, so their graphics weren't good. These are obviously remastered graphics, but they're still not very good either. Like no graphics in the game look good at all. Speaking of graphics, there's actually, when you first start up the game, there's no options on the main menu. There's only like new game, music gallery, like CG gallery, and quit, something like that. So you actually have to get in game in order to tweak any of the settings. But there's no like real like graphic settings or anything in this at all. There's very, very bare bones settings. Obviously, you're not going to need a high-end machine to be able to play these games. Like I'm sure they're coming out on Switch as well. But just, yeah, no options at all, hardly. Sticking with the theme that this is supposedly a remaster, some of the audio is just the lowest quality audio you've ever heard. I think it's like the school bell is a really good demonstration of how low quality some of the audio is, so I'll try and fit that clip in here. When you're roaming through dungeons, there is an option in the settings called, I think it's like ambient noise, and you know, on the surface that sounds like a cool setting. Like you'd have like water drips or whatever if you're in like a sewer kind of dungeon. The ambient noises are literally just a random assortment of various sounds. They could be anything, and they'll have absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing in the dungeon. It can be like a squawk. It can be a rock crumbling. It can be just a random creepy noise. And even if you're standing perfectly still in the dungeon, you'll still periodically hear these random, really annoying sounds. And it was just a bizarre inclusion, I think. I'll have a couple examples come up now, I'm sure. The final note I have for the first class of Heroes is that, like I said, I only played about 2 hours, but there's no story whatsoever to speak of. You're literally controlling this class of students. You go to school and you do a couple of quests, and the quests are meaningless. The quests are all intro to combat, intro to thievery, intro to being a bowmaster or something. No story, no overarching story whatsoever. Not even a hint of it in the first 2 hours, and that was very off-putting for me. I was expecting just a bit of a story, I guess. One final note on the first class of Heroes is I mentioned earlier that I felt really confused and lost and didn't know what to do when I started up the game. I'm kind of used to that feeling. Like I've said a couple of times, I've been playing the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. These are old JRPGs, they're old, actually, games from Japan, and games from that era didn't hold your hand. They didn't tell you where to go. So I've played the first 3 Final Fantasy games. I've been using a walkthrough guide for all 3 of them every step of the way, because otherwise I'm going to be completely lost and not know where to go. So I found it quite interesting to instantly feel that same sense in this game, Class of Heroes. And the reason I find it interesting is because, like I said, this game came out in 2008, 2009. The first Final Fantasy came out in 1987. That's over a 20-year difference, and I feel like games have improved a bit since 1987. They do give you tutorials, they do hold your hand a little bit more. So I was just surprised to feel as lost playing this 2008 game as I did playing a 1987 game. And I do think this game was kind of an anomaly. Like, if I look at other games that came out in 2009, they still feel like modern games. You had Assassin's Creed 2, you had Left 4 Dead 2, you had Batman Arkham Asylum. And another thing, I guess, is I mentioned that I looked up walkthroughs for Final Fantasy. Easy to find, Final Fantasy is pretty well known. I looked up walkthroughs for Class of Heroes. There is one walkthrough. There's a spoiler-free PSP walkthrough on GameFAQs, and I quite like spoiler-free walkthroughs for certain games. It works really well for Phoenix Wright. I don't think it works very well for Class of Heroes. It doesn't really explain anything about the game to me. It taught me where the quests were, but that was really good, and it vaguely teaches you how to finish the quests. But I definitely would have looked for a better walkthrough if one had existed. Nobody played this game when it came out on PSP, apparently. Nobody was playing it, nobody made walkthroughs for it, apart from this one person who made a very, very minimalist walkthrough. So I've spoken a lot about the first Class of Heroes. I'll talk a little bit about the second game now. Like I said earlier, I did not play it nearly as long as I played the first game for. In fact, I only played just about half an hour of the second game, and that was enough for me because it really is basically the first game, but very, very slightly better. There's slightly more of a story. You're kind of introduced to the school a little bit better. All the menus are exactly the same. You still interact with all the parts of the school exactly the same as the first game. Still a first-person dungeon crawler. You still have 6 party members that you make up out of your students. You still have a roster of students to organize and pick out the best ones. Everything looks slightly nicer. The character art's a little bit better. Still not very good at all. The dungeon environments look a lot better, but that's mostly because the dungeons in the first game looked so bad. Like the very first dungeon I went into in Class of Heroes 2G was a bright open, green, foresty kind of dungeon. That was just a breath of fresh air compared to the dank sewer dungeons of the first game. But still wasn't enough to make me actually want to play the game. As soon as I got into combat, it was exactly the same, just mashing A to get through it all, and I very quickly gave up on it. An interesting change is that dialogue is actually voiced in this one. It's voiced in Japanese. Really weird thing is that in the audio options, there's a music slider and a sound effect slider, but the voice volume isn't tied to either of those. It's independent of both of them and doesn't have its own slider. So you can turn down the 2 sliders as much as you want, but that voice volume will still be absolutely deafening, and it's far too loud by default. So I only played it for like half an hour. Like I said, I didn't really bother too much with it. I think I just turned everything down and had it really quiet. I don't know if this is like as a result of the dialogue being voiced, but the text speed is so much slower in the second game than it was in the first game, and you can't adjust the text speed. I say this in a lot of games, but I'm a fast reader. Slow text speed is the bane of my existence, and when you can't adjust it, I just stop playing a game. You still get all the same low-quality sound effects you did in the first game. I think that it's the school bell sound that's exactly the same as the first one. So I definitely did not spend much time here on the second game, because it really is practically identical to the first game, but looks slightly better, and that's about it. So that, practically everything I said about the first game also applies to Class of Heroes 2G. If you're wondering what the 2G part is, Class of Heroes 2 did come out on PSP in Japan just a year later, but then a port, like an enhanced port called Class of Heroes 2G, came out in Japan on the PS3 in 2010. So the first game is a remaster of the PSP version, whereas the second game here on Steam is a remaster of the PS3 version, I guess. And I always say in these kinds of reviews that I am absolutely a massive proponent of obscure niche games getting re-released on modern hardware, modern consoles, making it easier for people to play them. Who has a PSP nowadays versus who has a Switch, a PC? Not many people have a PSP nowadays. So I love when niche and obscure games get re-released, like I said. I'm never going to begrudge a weird game like this coming out. I just question why, out of all the weird games that are presumably still left on the PSP and PS Vita, for instance, This one was chosen. When it came out on PSP, it had very mixed reviews. If you go on Metacritic, it's sitting at a 61% with just 12 critical reviews. It's also sitting on at a 6.3 based on 6 user reviews. Not many people covered this game, not many people played this game, and it didn't review well. GamePro gave it 2.5 stars, IGN gave it 5.1 out of 10. This isn't like a beloved game. It's not, as far as I can tell from Googling around, I can't find much on this game at all. If you search Class of Heroes walkthrough, I think by like your 3rd Google result, it's not talking about Class of Heroes anymore, it's talking about completely different games. So I don't think this is a cult classic game, it's just a very, very strange choice for a remaster. Like I said, I'm never going to begrudge weird older games getting re-released and remastered or whatever. I'm just not fully sure why they chose this one. That was a much, much longer video than I was expecting to do on these games. I guess I had a lot to talk about. Sometimes it's easier to talk about negatives than positives. The overall thing, like 25 minutes into this video, I didn't like either of these games. I'm not going to play any more of them. I have no idea how much they're going to cost. Probably too much for what they are. If you love first-person dungeon crawlers, you might like these, but even as someone who doesn't despise that genre anymore, the combat was just so mind-numbing and full of mashing A. I just can't see anyone having fun with these. I would love to know if anybody played the originals. Let me know if you've even heard of these games. I hadn't heard of them before I got a press email about them. Let me know if you are interested in playing these games. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys very much for watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!